if I find myself on final and
Hmm.
for whatever reason it's like, oh no, I'm gonna go long,
Hmm.
what are my options or what's the best option?
Great. That's an awesome question because it happens, especially when you're on a lighter loaded, 9 cell, maybe student canopy or 190. Yeah, it already has a pretty good glide ratio, nearly 3 to 1. So part of it was on the base leg, not realizing that you needed to turn away from the target for a little while during the leg, right? You don't have to fly a square. So you can nip it in the bud by turning away on the base leg a little bit and even extending the base leg beyond the final line, right? Let me, you know what I mean by that? So if I'm on base leg, if I turn exactly on the line that takes me into the wind and straight towards the target, I might overshoot. So instead, I'm going to go beyond that line and then do a little bit of a cutback. When I do that, I got to look for the traffic. I got to use my neck, and make sure nobody's there because I'm doing something that's, I'm kind of being a deviant. And that's fine if nobody's there. Let's say I'm on final to answer your question most directly. Part of the solution is figuring out if there's wind or not. Because if there's wind and there's nobody behind you, you can slow the parachute's airspeed, and now your relative glide ratio gets steeper just by gently, not flaring, not dynamically hitting the brakes, but gently adding the brakes, slowing the canopy down. And now the distance that you travel will be markedly less. If the wind is, let's say, 5 miles an hour or more, that's your easiest solution because it's a solution that reduces your descent rate, gives you more time, calms your adrenaline, you're just floating down gently and you're just not going to go as far. With that, if you have wind, it's possible that it's not enough, that you're too close to the target, really too close. So you could go deeper, or you can turn away from the target in the brakes, wait a little while, and then turn back towards the target and then find that line. That's an option. All those things work fine when there's a headwind. But what if there's no wind, right? If I add brakes when there's no wind at all, it's not going to help. In some cases, especially on a big, slow, floaty canopy, it might make it a little worse as I get down past half brakes. It might flatten my glide. However, if I apply gentle brakes and then I let them off kind of quickly and I drop my legs deliberately, as I do that, I reduce the angle of attack, I reduce the G's, I feel less weight, and I'll actually not be going quite as far because of that loss of lift. You don't do it at 40 feet above the ground. This is, I'm 100 feet or more. I just collect a little bit of tail pressure, just a little bit of brake line pressure, and then I release it. And then I can do it again, release it again. So that's something that we use in paragliding when we're trying to top land. You take off from the top of the mountain, you get some altitude, and now you want to come around and land on the top of the mountain. They'll break and then surge, and it'll allow them to drop down. You just got to be really altitude aware, right? If you're too low, this is not appropriate. If you're in turbulence, this is not appropriate. Because if you do that in turbulence, you're reducing the line tension, and it's the line tension that creates the structure as much as the internal pressure of your airfoil. So that's an option. You also have the option of simply doing a graceful turn away, waiting, and then turning back, getting to the line and straighten it out again. So out and back. And you never do that back towards the pattern. If this was my pattern, downwind, base, final, I wouldn't get to final and then turn left towards where the traffic is coming. I would do my turn out to the outside pattern and then back in if I had to, right? So an S turn back and forth, if this is my final approach, this is not okay. I mean, unless you did a hop and pop, you were the only one to pass, nobody's around, you can do whatever you want, you know. But this little polyp, where you go to the outside, can be useful for sure. The other option, maybe somebody with 30 jumps wouldn't consider this one, depends on the person. But as you get more experience, getting on the front risers will also do this job, right? You pull on the front risers and you're steepening the glide ratio because you're putting more weight in the front of the parachute. She wants the dive. Just like if we're all in the airplane and we all rush towards the pilot at the same time, the plane's going to go into a dive. Center of gravity. So you move the center of gravity forward on the parachute. Of course, the problem is that they're hard to pull, right? Fronts are hard. However, if you apply a little bit of brakes, let's say a quarter brakes or so, and then you release quickly and grab the front risers in one motion from brakes. And I like to say you put on the brakes, you look at your front risers, because they probably have dive loops. Most of them do. You look at those dive loops and you reach for them and grab in one motion. You don't want to waste time, because if you reach and then you wait and then you finally get the dive loops and then you pull, it's too late. You're trying to place the canopy in front of you by surging, by letting off the brakes, and keeping it there by pulling a few inches of front risers. If you pull 1 inch, it's kind of hard. If you pull 4 or 5, it's easier. So you got to really kind of pull in and drive that canopy downhill. If you release them at 10 feet, you might not like the result. But if you get off of them by 50 feet, it's okay. You just have this extra speed, but then you'll have a pitch oscillation that you now have to contend with, which is another topic certainly that we can discuss. But if you're considering this, please do it up high a lot. Go to brakes, spot your front riser dive loops, and yeah, you're going to have to work. It's that easy, but it gives you more possibilities. It gives you another option that's going to allow you to hold your line, right? To not deviate in the way it brakes surging. You're not changing your heading. So if you got people on your right and your left, you can still do this. You can't do this. But the fronts are something that will also be helpful, especially on the light wind days where adding brakes to reduce the parachute's ground speed isn't going to work. You need a headwind for that to work. But you want to have skills that are queued up. In other words, you've rehearsed them. The graceful smooth turn away, and then the graceful smooth turn back. And in that process, you're thinking, well, if the ground comes up during this little S turn away and back, I can just hit both brakes and pull myself out of it. If you haven't practiced that part of it, you shouldn't be doing the beginning of this. You shouldn't be turning low. They tell students never turn low. I'm like, well, let's teach them how to turn low. And then when they're in a pinch and the only option for survival is to turn low, at least they're good at it. Don't is not a great word. Don't turn low, because it turns you into a victim. You're just waiting for the ground to come. And if there's a barn in front of you, well, I guess I'm going to hit the barn. But I didn't break the rule of don't turn low. That'll be a great story on the way to the hospital. So sometimes you do have to turn low. Overshooting, though, I think it's important to get to the root of it. How did we get there? Where you committed to a final approach where you've don't have enough runway in front of you. In that really, it helps to be able to look at a map of your drop zone and get a sense of how far that canopy is going to glide for each 100 feet of descent. How far is it going to go? So let's assume average parachute 2.5 to 1 glide ratio. Right? For every 100 feet, you go 250 feet forward. Student canopy, 3 to 1 glide ratio. All of this assuming no wind. If I have that scenario of somewhere between 250 and 300 feet of horizontal motion for every 100 feet I descend, if I turn final at 300 feet, now I'm going to go 750 to 900 feet. So go to Google Maps. You right click, you can stretch out a line and measure the distance of that line and get a sense of, how far that really is relative to this palm tree at Sebastian or whatever. I know where it needs to go. So that's a vital tool. We didn't have it when I started skydiving. There was no Google. We have the ability, as technologically, we can be doing a much better job in teaching skydiving than we have been. And I believe we will. It's just going to be, one drop zone owner at a time, one instructor at a time saying, screw it, man, let's just do it. Let's just try. You know, let's try to do the best possible job, you know, NASA level training.
Life is a risk. There's a huge risk in life. The biggest risk in life is that you'll waste it. Is that you'll be 80 years old and kicking yourself saying, if only I'd done this, oh, I wish I'd done that. The biggest risk in life is that you waste your opportunity of living it.